Well, we're back with the highly anticipated release from Jim Beam Distilling Company, the OGD 16 or Old Granddad 16. Let's go ahead and break this thing down today on the My Bourbon Journey Whiskey Review channel. All right, so here we are, OGD 16. Super excited for this. Was just in Bardstown, Kentucky when they dropped this, got down to the distillery and was lucky enough to snag one of these to do the review today. So again, excited to do this. OGD 114 is a super popular, inexpensive bourbon that all of us love. Now we're being hit with the OGD 16-year Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. Let's go ahead and give you some of the specs and let you know exactly what the OGD 16 has to offer. So availability, eventually this is going to get out to the masses. The OGD 16 comes in at 100 proof. Mash bill on this one's going to come in at 63% corn, 27% rye, and 10% malted barley. So it is going to be their high rye mash bill that Jim Beam offers. Again, it is age stated as 16 years old. And the price point on the 100 proofer is unfortunately $200. So take it for what it is, but we're gonna dive into this thing right now and give you guys a little idea of the breakdown, what you can ultimately expect from this, and is it worth your $200? So color-wise, as you can see, a really nice kind of burnt orange, kind of lightish to medium mahogany. As I move the whiskey around the glass, it is forming really nice legs around the glass for a 100 proofer. So we'll see exactly what this is gonna give us on the nose. So the first thing I get like right on the nose, again, is this wave of oak, but it's a beautiful like rickhouse oak type of note. Really nice kind of spicy burnt orange. Almost feels like a spicy burnt orange candy. There's a little bit of a candy aspect to it. Definitely hints of that kind of nuttiness or the classic nutty characteristic that you do get from Beam, but it's not overly dominant so far. Beautiful baking spices, a lot of those cinnamons, nutmegs, maybe even a little hint of like clove. Also some black pepper there as well. If there is fruit on this, I'm gonna say it's more of like a dried fruit. I wouldn't say it's overly intense, but there is a little underlying kind of fruit component to this. Maybe even like a little bit of like a fruit cake, something like that. All right, let's go ahead and dive into the palate and see what this one's gonna give us. Cheers. So let's break down the mouthfeel and texture of this whiskey so far. I think for a 100 proofer, it's probably on the higher scale of that kind of creamy aspect, not overly thick or rich or anything. Again, texture-wise, you know, probably on that medium scale, nothing overly dominant, nothing super oily. There are some nice oils, but nothing super crazy so far. So let's go ahead and break this one down and give you guys an idea of what this ultimately has to offer. Very interesting. All right, so my very first or initial impression is this spicy oak, orange, chocolate-ish kind of profile to it. It does lead with a lot of the oak characteristics, incredible spice factor. Again, there's a little bit of that orangesicle mixed in there with a little bit of that kind of vanilla cake or vanilla custard kind of aspect. But definitely think a little bit more on the candied side, just with that extra little bit of spice characteristic to it. As this thing kind of hits the mid to the back of the palate, a lot of that rickhouse oak and spice really want to linger there. You are still getting some of the effects of that kind of spicy orange, chocolate, maybe even a little hint of a honey note, but all of it has this slate, rickhouse oak, and spice factor to it. So I think with that spice that's on this will help with this being 100 proof, but allow it to maybe drink slightly higher just because of that spice factor. It's allowing for that finish to really kind of linger. So we'll kind of dive into this thing a little bit more and see what else we can pull out of this. I will say with the oak component, it does give you, again, that slightly dusty aspect. Again, we're talking about a 16-year-old bourbon as the minimum age within this blend. So there are going to be those components or slightly oak tannins that are there. It doesn't have a major drying effect on it. It just has these beautiful kind of orange, spicy, vanilla, oak characteristics with that underlying baker's chocolate that's there. So far, I think how they've kind of blended this, it's a really, really nice sipping bourbon so far. The other thing I'll kind of talk about is the balance and kind of richness of this. Again, we don't see a lot of, ultra aged bourbons in today's market for the most part. And again, with the minimum age of this blend being 16 years, you are going to have a lot of those, again, like I've described before, a lot of those rich, bold, hearty type of components within this blend. But I think they've done a fantastic job of making all of what I've described work extremely well together. So you get little bits and pieces of everything that I've described balanced perfectly. So if I'm sitting down to sip on this and I want something that, again, has a little bit more richness, maybe a little bit more of that spice, oak kind of characteristic, combining with those vanillas, a little bit of that burnt orange, some kind of baker's chocolate, this would be a fantastic pour to either sip on yourself or share with somebody else. I don't think this is a typical Jim Beam profile. Again, they don't release or haven't had a lot of ultra old releases. There have been a couple, but again, when you start getting into these ages, it starts to become a slightly different profile. Again, there still will be a little bit of that classic or typical Jim Beam effect. So you are getting some of that nuttiness, but it's more balanced in there, if that makes any sense. It's not something that's just predominant like you can get in some of the other releases. This is balanced extremely, extremely well. So how they've blended this, I think they've done a fantastic job of allowing this to be at that 100 proof point, but without losing all of the richness and kind of characteristics of what this bourbon probably was at cask strength. Would we all love to have that? Absolutely, and it'd be extremely interesting to see what that kind of profile would be. But again, at 16 years old, $200, generally available. I think this is a nice bourbon. I think it's a nice representation of what 16-year-old bourbon can be from Jim Beam. Now, as we transition into the finish, I think, again, that 16-year bourbon as the youngest aged bourbon within this blend is really showing up. I think it's allowing for this bourbon, like I mentioned before, to drink a slightly higher proof, maybe closer to that 107, 110 proof. So you are getting what I feel is a slight bump in proof just based on the oak, the spice, and then you're left with kind of that orange, vanilla, kind of maybe a spicier orange, great baking spices, baker's chocolate. Again, that little bit of nutty characteristic that Beam is kind of classic for. So again, I think at the end of the day, it's a great 100 proof bourbon. Now, if we talk about value, again, value is subjective. Would I like to see this priced maybe a little bit less? I think going into it, before I even knew ultimately what the price was, I was thinking that this might be in that 150-ish, give or take, $10 one way or the other. So at $200, this becomes a premium type of bourbon. And again, value and worth, that's subjective and up to you. But in today's day and age, for what this is, I think it's probably priced accordingly. Whether we like it or agree with it, it's kind of what it is. So I'll leave that part of it up to you in terms of, is it worth that? That will be entirely up to you. But again, overall, I think for the offering and the profile that it has, I really do enjoy what this has to offer. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hopefully that helps. If you're one of the ones that were or are lucky enough to get it, leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts. Were you picking up some of the notes or characteristics that I was as I kind of described these in the video? So again, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can through my Patreon page, and that also allows you to become part of the Mash and Journey Whiskey Club. If you'd like to follow me, you can on Facebook and Instagram, those places at My Bourbon Journey. So there you have it, the OGD 16 from Jim Beam Distilling Company. Again, let me know your thoughts on this one, but remember, it's about the journey and not the destination. Cheers.
Slow it down.